What up, everybody? We
How we all
are
doing?
How we doing? How we doing? It is Paul and Indi, Sadboy Sessions, episode 2. We're coming at you today with a fun one that me and Indi have been talking about for a while, specifically regarding financial literacy. And I know we've gotten into a lot of conversations as a society about like billionaires and the ethics of capitalism and all those kind of good things. And we've decided to, have a conversation about that and hopefully it can translate to something meaningful for you. So,
Yeah.
Indy, without further ado, take it away.
All right. So I really wanted to start on financial literacy specifically. I remember when Paul and I started talking about this. This was actually the part of the topic that kind of spawned everything else that I was looking into and researching. As a country, we've actually been talking about the concept of the 1% or wealth inequality overall since around like the mid 70s, mid 80s. If you really think about it, though, income inequality as a concept has been around since like 1700s France. That's why people were being beheaded. That's where the concept of bougie and the bourgeoisie
Oh,
came
yeah.
about. Um, so it's the French Revolution is really one of the only notable historic events where we can see a working class that clearly said, screw the ruling class, screw the aristocracy, we're going to do this our way. That all being said, like despite having both historical examples of inequality and wealth, as well as like modern day versions of it within America, we still see the wealth gap widening every single day between the people on the top and the people in the bottom. So one thing I found while I looked at some scholarly articles specifically to get the facts on financial literacy, because I really wanted to understand where we as America were going wrong and how we understand money. So what I found was that there was a test done in the US, and it basically asked citizens two questions. It asked as a percentage how much of the wealth should be controlled by the top 20% richest Americans. And then it asked the question in a more concrete form, what's the monetary number in dollars that the average household wealth for the top 20% richest Americans, how much should that be? And what we found was that Americans were giving a lower percentage for how much wealth should be controlled by the top 20%. They didn't think the top 20% should have the most share of the wealth. But then when they turned around and they were asked to give like an actual dollar value to how much the household wealth for the top 20% should be, they were astronomically higher than what it would actually be if we had an equal economy, if we had no wealth inequality, if we had no wealth gap. So they can understand percentage-wise what a more equitable society looks like, but when given the option to like choose how much money, they really don't understand what the cost of living is or the cost of investment is within our society. So three things that constantly came back across a lot of the tests that I found that people were asking in terms of financial literacy is they were asking three questions across the board that kind of gave researchers a better understanding of how literate Americans, and they did this test worldwide. It's three standard questions, and they test our understanding as people. They test our understanding of interest, inflation, and risk diversification. So those are three economic concepts that if you understand those, you should relatively be able to make it by in our economy.
Yeah.
So the three questions are as follows. Suppose you had $100 in a savings account and the interest rate was 2% per year. After 5 years, how much would you have in the account if you left the money to grow? Would you have more than $102, less than $102? Do not know, refuse to answer. The question on inflation. Imagine that the interest rate on your savings account was 1% per year and inflation was 2% per year. After 1 year, would you be able to buy more than, the same as, or less than today with the money in your account? do not know, refuse to answer. And then the last one is true or false. Buying a single company stock usually provides a safer return than a stock mutual fund. So if you guys don't know, a single company stock is going to be, let's say I go out and I invest in Apple, or I invest in Amazon, or Bed Bath & Beyond. That means I'm buying just that company's stock. That means I have a share of just that company. However, if I purchase something in a stock mutual fund, it's a collection of stocks. So if one business in that fund drops, but the other 9 skyrocket, you've overall made a profit. So those 3 questions across the board give us a pretty good understanding of how financially literate or illiterate we are. And as we've realized, Americans are financially illiterate. The really cool thing I like about the test is it's a yes or no thing. Did you get all 3 questions right? Did you get one of them wrong? You're not, like, you can essentially say, yeah, I'm kind of financially literate, but really it's a test of, do you know it all, or do you only know some of it? And then I've actually got a couple numbers here. Let me.
Okay, before you get into the numbers,
Yeah.
I just wanted to like put into perspective, I guess, the question of, are you financially literate, right? Like you said, it's a yes or no.
It's a yes or no question.
It's a yes or no question, right? And it was weird for me because I didn't even know this test existed. So background, and I know you know, but for anybody that's listening that doesn't, is like,
Yeah.
I majored in economics. So inflation and all that kind of good stuff was like bread and butter when it came to what we learned in college.
Yeah.
But just looking at these 3 questions, I'm not gonna lie, I was scared that I was getting one of them wrong. Like, and it's weird because,
which one was it for you? Which one do you think you might get wrong?
you know why it was actually really sad? It's the question about inflation, which is literally the one I should have known right off the bat without thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
And then that made me doubt, right? Because I'm like, well, I mean, I should know, I would think more than most about inflation, but just realizing that I didn't, or that I had to question myself when it came to this, and then whether or not I got that question right was the difference between being financially literate or being financially illiterate.
It's that, yeah.
Like, oh no, you know, and I think that's crazy because I think one really important thing to note, right, and I think it's something that we'll touch upon, and it will go into, you know, the reason why some are financially illiterate or literate is they always say like, illiterate people aren't stupid, right? They've just never been taught how to do something. So for me, like, feeling all, you know, college educated, like this is what I should know, and then questioning what I know when it comes to this test is like really disconcerting, because everybody should be financially literate, right? Like, to be able to answer these 3 questions shouldn't be like a hill to climb, right? And I guess this is where, and not to go too off base, but you know, people always complain, or I'd say not complain, but bring up issues that our public education system doesn't give us real information to be able to, you know, navigate through this life and our economy and all these things. And I think that's the case, you know, with this is, just because you're financially illiterate, if you didn't know any of those 3 questions, and, you know, Indi will about to give the results, which is why I wanted to mention this ahead of time, is like, you're not stupid. It's just that it hasn't come to you, and it hasn't been presented to you in a way that's like digestible. And then, you know, if you're somebody that does, you know, did get these questions right, and did know these things and didn't even have to think twice, like, you know, maybe there's a situation as to why that is true in your own life. But I don't think that just any old person would just randomly know these 3 things, right? They're not intuitive.
I can point to like specific moments in my life that are reasons why I know the answers to these questions. But like, and I think I'm going to touch more on this later, but it is kind of a privilege as of right now to be financially literate, because typically most people who are going to be financially literate will be able to save more. They'll be able to spend more. They'll be able to actually like interact with our economy and buy and sell stocks. In my family, we actually had like a fantasy stock challenge 2 years ago.
That's so nerdy. That's so cool.
It's so great. I think everyone should do it. I think it's cooler than fantasy football. That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
So what we did, we got 10,000 imaginary dollars and we set it up in a Google sheet. And any given day, we were able to look at the actual market and buy our stocks. And at the end of each quarter, we wanted to see our growth. I think we did it 2 quarters or 3 quarters. We checked our growth to see where we were in comparison to $10,000. Me and my dad both made some very, very smart choices. He made a fantastic choice. He bought like this $6 stock that shot up to like $12. Homeboy made it.
Yeah.
But I've always been economically minded when it comes to stock. My dad like kind of had MSNBC around while I was growing up. So I was choosing out Disney as a stock when I was like 8 years old, back when it was $20. So I think there's definitely really big things that can lead to more or less financial literacy within our population.
Yeah.
So back to our answers.
Okay, yes, go back, because I want to, okay, go for it.
So I do, so for the compound interest question, obviously, I don't want to say obviously, my bad. The answer for that one is you will have more than $102. Because think of it, if it's 2% per year and you've got it over 5 years, it's 100, 102, and then 2% on top of that for 4 more years. So right off the bat, you've got more than $102 because of interest. And then, so within context of America, and this paper that I looked at also has international statistics as well. But in just the States, for the first question, 67% of people got it right, which you might be thinking 67 is a very high number. But compound interest out of these 3 questions and out of financial literacy as a whole is probably one of the easiest topics. I think what tends to confuse people is the concept of like money and banking. But if I went to someone and was like, I'm going to give you 100 apples, every year you're going to get 2% more of whatever you have. You can do that math. So 67% getting that question correct is actually quite low. That one was disconcerting for me as a person. Incorrect answers for that one, 22%. And then 10% of people didn't know, 1% refused to answer. For the inflation question, there were actually more people that got the inflation one wrong. And that actually makes sense because inflation as a concept for me also took so long. It's something that I've only recently come to understand. Inflation as a term, for those of us who don't know what that is, it is the concept that the value of money can go up or down based on how much of it is in the economy. Let's say the government turns around tomorrow and prints out $3 trillion. My single dollar is now worth less because there's so much more of it in the economy already. It's supply and demand put to how much your money is worth. 75% of people in the US got that one right, which did surprise me. I expected more people to get the compound interest one right than the inflation one.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
I think what threw people on the compound interest, and it's what threw me the first time I looked over it, is that for the compound interest one, it's over 5 years, but your percentage is every year. So I think people got confused. They were like, is it 2% over 5 years, or is it 2%, 2%, 2%, 2%? It's the latter.
Yeah.
So I think that might be why some more people got that one wrong. Only 13% of people got the inflation one incorrect, which is a much better number. Still not fantastic, but much better. And again, 10% said they did not know. The stock risk, which is the hardest of the 3 questions by far, 52% of Americans got it correct. So about half of the US population doesn't understand that, which is, again, understandable. This is the part that made me at least a little happy, is that there was not a high percentage of incorrect answers. For the stock one, it was also 13% incorrect, same as inflation. However, 33% of people openly acknowledged that they did not know what stock risk was, which is fantastic. That, like, it would be one issue for Americans to be financially illiterate. It would be another issue for them to think that they're literate and not be. So I'm glad that at least one of the questions we don't think we're right.
Yeah.
And then they went ahead and they summed up how many people got all versus no responses correct. And remember that in this test, 3 is the only pass. 2, 1, or 0 correct means you are financially illiterate. So the percentage of American population that got all 3 responses correct is only 34.3. The amount of people that got 2 correct is 35.8, which is really great. Again, most of that's probably going to come from that last question. Only 16% of people got 1 response correct, and only 10% of people got it all wrong. Which, looking at it as most of us are financially illiterate, that's a very disheartening statement. But then going further to say, okay, only 1/10 of America got all 3 of those questions wrong. That's a much better statistic to look at.
Yeah.
And then I did want to take that and move that to just in general where we are sitting against the rest of the world. Most other countries, if you look at, let's say, the Netherlands, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, their percentage correct for answer 1 versus our 65% was closer to 80 to 85%. New Zealand is actually all the way up at 86%.
Wow.
And more people, far fewer people responded that they didn't know in other countries. So they at least gave an answer even if they weren't sure of what it was. And most often it was correct. Even for the inflation question, we're again sitting at 65% correct, but most other countries are sitting closer to 70 to 80%. So we can see that we are as a country behind in where we are financially literate wise.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, doing things as a kid that get you to better understand finances is probably one of the best ways to increase your financial literacy later on in life. I've had the pleasure of like my dad always sitting me down, and he taught me from a really young age. He said, any money you make, any money at all, do 30-30-30. So 30% of it you save, 30% of it you spend, 30% of it you donate to charity. So he breaks it down. I think it was donated, it was save, spend, and I'm pretty sure he said charity. It's been a long time since I've had to like go back to that concept. So
That's
30% to charity does seem like a big number.
That does sound
now that
like
I'm saying
lot.
it. What was it? Oh my gosh. Save, spend. Oh, there was something else.
It's like, or I don't know. I feel like everything. Yeah, I don't know.
There was another thing that my money was supposed to go to. Maybe invest, but I feel like that would go into
investments are not savings.
That's true. Maybe it's invest.
Maybe it's invest.
I'll go back and double check with my dad after this.
Okay.
But you know, putting that into place as a parent for your kid as they're growing up can lead your kid to just have better money sense overall, and then putting them in positions to like play fantasy stock games or, you know, watch MSNBC, just being around those places as a kid is really important to understanding financial literacy. I could only imagine how little I would understand about our economy if I didn't grow up watching what I did. And most of that was not my choice. A lot of what I consumed about like economic information growing up was because it was my dad watching it and I just had no choice.
Yeah.
I gravitated towards Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon. My brother did not. He was like, let me watch something factual. But starting at a really young age and just thinking about money really, really helped me. And I would assume a lot of people is the way to go about it.
And I mean, I guess it's just like anything at that point, right? It's the environment you're surrounded with will influence the information that you know and are exposed to. Which, and I don't know if we're jumping the gun or how we're approaching this topic, but for something like financial literacy, which almost if we're going to talk about it as a generational transfer of information to like your
Yeah.
parents or my parents to me, and then of course, like, you know, further down the line, it is they have to have that information ready, right? They have
Yes.
to, and I think one thing that's important to note, even just given the questions of the test, is why would you know how investing in like a mutual fund versus, you know, a single business, how would you know that if you never had the amount of money or the amount of disposable income to invest within the
To
stock
think
market,
about
right?
stocks.
Right,
Yes.
right. And that's kind of like, that's kind of what I want to touch on is there is, you know, deep down, and I guess you can drill down far enough into anything to find, you know, some type of, like, I guess, result. Oh, what
Hello.
up, Bunga?
I'm recording a podcast right now.
I'm vacuuming.
I didn't even hear that he was vacuuming.
I-
I didn't. I had no idea. That was
Me
a
either.
surprise. I
Yeah.
should probably lock my door.
Quick.
But yeah, just going back to it, is like there is some deep seated, you know, causation of the reason why people are still
Yeah.
financially illiterate, and it goes back to
Illiteracy causes illiteracy.
Yeah.
You know, and I am going to get to this in just a second
okay,
as well. But when you don't have enough money to save, and that's really the biggest issue right now, is that the people of America are quite literally barred from understanding financial literacy because they just don't have the money to participate in the system in that way.
yes,
When you are scraping by and when every cent of your paycheck goes towards your living costs, you do not have the time or the brain space to go, let's buy stocks, you know?
or
That's,
the capital, right? Like you
or
can't
yeah,
even buy stocks. Like,
you don't have the money for it. It's not on your radar. It's nowhere near, and it shouldn't be. You know,
Yeah.
I can't blame poor people for not interacting with the economy in the way that rich people do. I can't blame them. It's not their fault.
Yes. No, and exactly. And I guess I guess I don't know what our next step is, because I don't want to like cross
That's
too
all right.
fast. But
I
like,
want to talk. Are we moving forward?
yeah, let's do it.
Okay,
Let's do
yeah.
it.
So I want to talk now that we've understood why people are financially illiterate. I want to talk
Yeah.
about what this lack of financial literacy is really leading to. I know we as a country see the effects of financial illiteracy every day, and I know, like I said at the beginning, we've seen it historically. But I think, you know, recontextualizing financial illiteracy and how it affects us today is really important.
Mhm.
So you're going to have, right off the bat, you're going to have no return potential. Return potential being that, like, buying stocks and investing. Because illiteracy can lead from anything to, in general, unexpected costs. And that can be from, like, taking out a loan or something like that, to just being unable to open up accounts or get a credit card or stuff like that. It can lead to an inability to manage your liabilities and your assets, which is basically how you manage your debt. My dad's been talking about this a lot recently, is like, it doesn't really matter how rich you are, it just matters how you manage what you owe.
Mhm.
Which I don't think is entirely correct, and I don't really want to talk about that too much because I'm not as familiar with that concept. But the biggest way that thinking about liabilities, assets, debts, the biggest example of that I find is in the 2008 market crash.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the movie The Big Short. If
Mhm.
you haven't seen it, if you're listening to this and you haven't seen it, I highly recommend going to watch it. It's on Netflix. It's all about the 2008 housing market crash and how it happened, who it affected. It's fantastic. I didn't understand what happened in 2008 until I like saw that movie, because it sits you down and it explains it in like a quick 2 hours very well.
Mhm.
But basically what was happening is that people were buying homes and they did not have the money to pay the interest on those homes. They couldn't they couldn't continuously afford them. But the people that they were getting home loans for were just like, oh yeah, it's no biggie. And then, in a couple of years, you can actually possibly, refinance and change this rate. And people didn't understand what they were locking into when they were buying huge houses for no down payment on like crappy bonds. And they, months later down the line, they just foreclose and they stop making their payments. That's what happened in 2008. Was really just the economy giving a lot of buying power to people who did not know how to manage that power. And I'm not going to put that as a, that's on the people, that's on the banks. I couldn't possibly tell, Joe Schmo not to buy his house and not to know that he couldn't afford his house. Because as we're talking, that's what financial illiteracy does.
Yeah.
One way that financial illiteracy affected me personally was credit card statements. I had no clue what like balance fees were or like what holding a balance on a card really did. I got a card, my first card had like 12-month or 18-month no interest financing. And I was like, do I have to pay none of it? Do I have to pay just the minimum? I don't really know how any of this works. And luckily it didn't hit me too much, but I can understand that a whole lot of people would get slammed by credit cards. Do I have a stat here? Bam, I have a stat here. 29% of cardholders hold 42% of all card member fees. And the least literate of those people had 50% higher debt than the average cardholder. So that means that a very small amount of people hold almost half of all of the credit cards debt. And then of that really small amount of people, most of those are already incredibly poor.
Yeah.
So it's just a bad situation, and you're approving people who can't necessarily pay off their credit cards to get credit. Credit companies are really bad too, because they'll increase your credit limit and not always tell you. That happened to me like 3 times. I hopped on my Discover card account and it was like, you've got a credit line of $8,000. And I was like, it was $500 yesterday. So that's a big increase. And credit companies will do that to you. And if you are not watching how much you're putting on your card, you're going to go over your old limit before you realize it.
Yeah.
And then I want to say probably the last like really big thing that this whole issue of financial illiteracy is leading to is problems with retirement.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh my gosh. I think about retirement all the time. I have known for a long time that Social Security is probably going down the shitter. So I'm going to have to figure out how to give myself yearly income when I'm 60 years old. So we built this country on the concept of the American dream, and you're going to work really hard for a lot of years, but then it's going to pay off and you hit like 50, 60, maybe 65, and then it's just like easy breezy, beautiful cover girl. The American dream in that system no longer works, and working hard really isn't an option, and there's a whole lot of reasons why. I got a lot of this information that's coming up from Hassan Minhaj's Patriot Act episode about retirement. It's a half hour in its entirety, and he goes into much more information than I'm talking about. But he kind of sums it up as 3 big pillars in society that support healthy retirement. And in the last like 50 or so years, those pillars have just been eroding quickly. So 40, 50 years ago, when we had jobs like big boy jobs, when we worked for Amazon, Boeing, WellPoint, whatever, we typically got pensions, which is of our paycheck, a portion of it would be taken by the company and put into a fund. And then when you retire, the company takes that money and gives it back to you. And it's already set. You typically didn't have to do anything to actually end up in that program. The nice thing about pensions is that they are stable. It's not an investment. The money goes, and it's as far as I know, I was never around when pensions were around, so I'm not sure, but I think it was just
Yeah,
a
neither.
1 ratio. Um, in the 80s and 90s, the government ended up turning to incentivizing 401k plans as opposed to pension plans. So a 401k and a IRA, they are two investment opportunities where companies will, just like a pension, they will take part of your paycheck and put it into a fund. However, with a pension fund, it's just sitting there waiting for you to retire. With a 401k, it's being invested in the market. That does mean that it's a risk. So your 401k could end up going down the shitter if the economy does too. And then when you walk out in retirement, you might have less, a little bit more. Some people strike big, but it's a risk overall. Pensions were a lot safer. And because 401ks are a risk, most people tend to either opt out or they're already saving so much money that they can't opt in the first place. So that's just one really big thing that's led to a lot of people having big funds not available to them when they retire. The second big one is that overall people in general are saving less than they used to. Obviously, that's going to be attributed to a higher cost of living and, typically static income throughout the years means you'll have less margin to save overall. And the last really big thing that is, screwing us over when we retire is, like I said at the start of talking about retirement, there's no Social Security funds in the government. And in order to kind of create those funds, that's where we want to talk about taxing the rich and reallocate those funds. I know I've said it multiple times in the past, and I know this is not the way that it's going to go down. And I think Paul can agree with me on this, but if we really want to save everyone right now, if I could snap my fingers and have everyone have enough money, it really would be as easily as taking all of Jeff Bezos's money and all of Bill Gates's money and all of Warren Buffett's money and just going, this is theirs now. That's how it's gonna. We can't do that, and I understand that we can't do that, but that's a solution.
It's there.
It's there.
Yeah, and I think this is the part of the whole episode that I think I'm the most excited about, is because we've kind of talked about is like where we are, right? Is like we as a people, as a collective, outside of the people that are, I mean, I guess we're included in the people that are privileged to be considered financially literate, but then there's there's that like next tier people that can invest in the stock market and like all those kind of, you know what I mean? Like
I have bought 2 stocks. That's my financial literacy. There are people my age who have like whole portfolios. That's upper echelon.
Yeah.
That's what Paul's talking about.
Yeah. And there's, like we said before, right? There is a tie between how much income or just money you have to be able to play with that doesn't go to paying for food that goes in your mouth or paying for the roof on top of your head. Like there are those barriers to entry when it comes to something like the stock market, when it comes to saving, when it comes to understanding different types of bank accounts that you can get. Like there isn't just a checking and a savings. Like you get like a CD, you can get all these different things. How to understand how mortgages work. Like there are a bunch of different things that your money goes to that a lot of people don't understand, right? I think everybody understands like, oh, you have to pay $1,000 for rent. You know what that is? You're like, okay,
that's basics.
$1,000 for rent. Yeah, that's basics, right? Because you understand that concept.
No, you know what it is that those concepts chase you down. Like, everybody, doesn't matter who, pays rent. Like even Jeff Bezos pays something for his house. So we all understand the concept of cost of living because it's something we all participate in. Yeah. Most of us are not participating in the higher forms of that economy, which is why we aren't understanding those concepts.
Yeah, and to understand is to maximize, right? Like how can you maximize your investment of time, your investment of your savings, your investment of everything if you don't really fully understand what it all goes to and how it interacts within either the greater economy or within your own life. And then so going to what we're talking about when it comes to to taxing the rich and those kind of things that you've kind of heard being shouted on the internet and those kind of things, or like eat the rich or whatever, is like there is no, I don't think there is the right way, right? And I think we're both on the same page. Like we can't just knock on Jeff Bezos' door and take his money. Like that's wrong, right? But I think, and this might be, I don't know, just too opinionated or whatever, but like I do believe 100% is that like people that have more need to pay more into the system.
Yes.
100%. And I think a big issue is sometimes they're paying less into the system than others are.
Yeah.
You know,
and I mean, I'll even take it a step further than that, right? Because I love that sentiment, because it kind of makes it go like, hey, if you're better off, then you should probably donate a little bit more to society. And it's
at least like 30% to charity. You know what I'm saying?
30. I kind of want to take it like a step further and really place the onus of moral responsibility on these people, because the way I see it, and really, if we're thinking about inflation and we're trying to control inflation, this is one thing that we have to think about. There's only so much money in the economy. There's only so much money in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
How can I have $1 billion if they've all got $20 billion? The richer they get, the harder it is for everybody else to achieve that same level of income, because money's a resource.
Yes.
I can get richer. I can hit my Billy at the same time that Jeff Bezos does, but I'm going to trash everyone else's dollars in order to hit that point. So I want to take it that step further and say, look, billionaires are consuming a resource of the economy, money. They need to put that resource back.
Yeah, and that is, in essence, the reason why we have a dwindling middle class, right? Because essentially, if you're in the middle class, right, and we're going to get into capitalism. Oh, we're going to get into capitalism. Because
we're gonna talk for a hot second. We talked about what financial literacy does and how it screws the working class.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk for a hot second about how billionaires utilize their financial literacy to cheat the system, and then we're gonna talk about the system that allows them to cheat.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about billionaires first?
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay, let's do that. We're about like 35 minutes, just letting you know.
Perfect.
Okay.
So, like I said, all these different ways that financial illiteracy screws us as people. Not necessarily me or Paul, but a lot of people.
Yeah.
Billionaires can utilize their financial literacy to constantly give themselves more and more legs up. Again, this is a fair amount of information from another Hassan Minhaj episode of the Patriot Act on Billionaires.
We love Hassan Minhaj.
He does talk about more than I do, and I talk about a couple things that he doesn't, so I do recommend running over to Netflix and giving that a watch. So the first big thing is billionaires utilize philanthropy as a concept to kind of make themselves seem better than they are. And it's called big philanthropy, and it's incredibly performative. It's so easy for Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos to give away $1 million. Us as people, when we see like a rich person give away $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, hundreds of millions of dollars, we kind of gawk, because that's a lot of money to us. But that's nothing for them. And that's kind of where you have to understand it, is like, if I've got $10 and I'm giving Paul $5, that's huge.
Yeah.
If I've got $1,000 and I give Paul $5, I don't care. I don't need my $5 back.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's why when I buy you coffee, I'm like, I don't care. You'll hit me back whenever.
Yeah.
So in the same exact way, we can't just be letting billionaires get off with like, hey, I donated $100,000. It's like, all right, you already made it back.
Yeah.
Just there, right there. So that's really bad. There's a couple different ways that billionaires donate. There's a couple different types of donations that they go to. Mm-hmm. One really big thing is a donor advised fund. And Amazon has used this multiple times. They just used it a couple months ago when they I think it was $10 million they put into green initiatives. Donor advised funds are basically funds for your money that are gonna get donated, and you put your money in that fund and you get the tax write-off, but that money is still theoretically yours and it has not been donated yet. So you get to get your write-off immediately, like you're putting it into a checking account, but you're keeping that money essentially. That's a little screwed up. And then, you know, because it's a fund and it's not gone directly into the system, you can then pull that money back out of that fund. The CEO of GoPro actually did something, and as soon as I found out about this, I'm like, this is terribly corrupt. The CEO of GoPro donated to a donor advised fund, but he did not donate with money. He donated with stock shares. So he essentially was like, hey, I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to use small numbers so everyone understands it. I'm going to give you guys $1,000, but it's going to be 10 shares of GoPro stock that are all worth $100. That's how I'm paying you. He gets a write-off then for $1,000 worth of money. Weeks later, GoPro's stock tanks. Let's say the stock is now only worth $50. You've still got 10 stocks, but now you only have $500 in that donor advised fund. And Mr. CEO of GoPro still got his full write-off.
Yeah.
That's messed up. And in the interview, he's like, I don't see what's wrong with it. I'm like, you don't? You don't?
Yeah.
And then you've got 501c4s, which are, you know, nonprofit companies that you can donate to, but they keep your donations completely anonymous. So essentially you can donate, and that's how a lot of dark money actually ends up in our political campaigns. That is something that he talks about in the episode that I won't get too much into here. But dark money is important, and billionaires handle dark money. So another big thing with 501c4s is you don't necessarily know what they're standing for, and you don't know who is donating. And it allows people to say, I donated to charity. Which one? It's a 501c4. Don't ask what it is. Sackler, who they're a company that distributed opioids. They donated to 501c4s to try and look good. But again, they're just anonymous donations to companies that support opioids. Papa John, we love Papa John. He loves to do this. He will donate so often and then turn around and be racist. And that's one big thing that we cannot allow philanthropy to do. It does not wipe your moral slate clean. You know, and I'd rather a billionaire not have $1 billion to clean his, you know, moral slate. I'd rather that money get put back into the economy properly. And then, you know, one last thing that Hassan Minhaj talks about with money is that it essentially allows you, when you have enough of it, to override the democratic process, which is something that Bill Gates did in Washington years ago. They had an issue. It was a bill between public schools and charter schools. And the public, mostly going to public schools, was like, hey, we don't really want a bunch of support for charter schools here. Let's keep it to our public schools. And they voted it down. It went up about, I think, 2 or 3 times, and Bill Gates ended up just like putting a bunch of money into stuff and pushed the bill through in the end, and essentially just went, yeah, I know that people didn't want this and voted against it, but I bought it anyway. And, you know, he paid his way past all of those people's votes, which is, you know, a huge hit to our democracy as a concept. Yeah. So billionaires are immoral, you know, and they utilize their constant leg ups to figure out how to keep getting themselves more billions and just make it look like they're helping the American people when they are sincerely not.
Yeah. And I guess this is the point where we get into, like, should we even have them, right? Like, and this will go with the system. Down with the rich.
Eat the rich. I've said it. I'm like, hey, if somebody brought out a guillotine, I'm not trying too hard to convince them otherwise. You know, not at this point.
Yeah, and I guess we can go into the system now, right? Because the whole idea is capitalism enables this kind of one behavior and then two action. So
Yes.
so Indy and I were having a conversation one car ride somewhere recently that was like, is a billionaire's existence and purpose like a result of capitalism, or is it a result of, hey, capitalism incentivizes me to be kind of selfish and do all these things to maximize profit all the time, so I'm gonna go, screw over some workers and underpay them and undercut other businesses and remove them from the market and all these kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And I think what ultimately, this is a work in progress thought, but if you were to look up like capitalism as defined in the dictionary, is an economic system characterized.
My dad wants this. My dad wants this definition. So like,
Okay.
pay attention.
All right. The definition is an economic system characterized by private or corporate ownership of capital goods, by investments that are determined by private decision, and by prices, production, and distribution of goods that are determined mainly by competition in a free market. All right. So I think everybody's already on the same page that America operates in a capitalistic environment.
Yes.
And I think at its most basic concept, everyone who's ever had to go through public school, probably private school, but had to learn the basics of economy, understands what a free market is.
Yeah.
It is, I sell apples, Indy sells apples, we both sell apples. Our demand is, or the demand of the people dictates how many apples we supply, and vice versa. Eventually we reach a median price where all parties can operate. As operation costs change, and let's say I am able to produce apples more efficiently, and mind you, this is all in a vacuum. I forgot to mention that, but everything is within the vacuum, right? Of this little fucking, this little box.
We made it so far.
My bad. I'm so sorry. I get really amped about this concept because I think about it in the shower a lot.
Can I get my one? Can I get my one F-bomb? Great.
Sure.
Fuck capitalism. That's it.
Okay. All right. Now you can bring your kids back into the room. But that concept in and of itself it's a free market, right? We operate where buyers and sellers are operating within a certain level of fairness, and that fairness is like what makes it free. But when you look at markets, right, and thankfully this is something I learned, but like every market is different. The smartphone market is not like, does not factor in people's demands for apples or anything like that. Apple, but like not, that was unintended. But each market has its own set of players, right?
Yeah.
People that are willing to buy, and then people that are willing to sell within that market. But if you're a company, let's say an ISP, how many options do you have?
I'm so glad
locally,
you brought up ISPs.
We have Spectrum, we have AT&T. Who else do we have? We have, is Time Warner Spectrum now? Time Warner
Spectrum. We don't have
what's
Google.
The other one?
It's just those two, really. Unless you're getting like dial up.
Yeah.
Those are the two big ISPs in our neighborhood.
Now you tell me, right? Like,
it sucks. I could talk about this for so long. It's so weird that either company can be successful in a capitalist market, because I have qualms with both companies. They're both terrible. How are either of them successful?
Because they're the only ones in the market. Because
please do it better.
And that's the thing, right? In theory, in this bubble that we created in our basic senior year economic class, is that if party number 3 wants to come in and start selling apples, they can do so, right?
Yeah.
But in the world, and in I don't want to limit it to the States, because that's not to say corruption doesn't happen everywhere. It does. But companies
But
get undercut. And I think this is something that, you hear about like with Amazon all the time. Like Amazon looks at all their performance
competitors.
data
Yeah.
of people that sell through Amazon, because it's one of the biggest platforms. Like you can't be a small business and not like really sell through Amazon, or else you're never going to hit a big enough market to be able to sustain yourself. But let's say you sell on Amazon, Amazon notices that you're doing well, and they're like, oh, people have a really specific interest in like tiny dog leashes. I don't know, something like that. And they're like, you make as a company maybe like $3 million. Even that would be a lot. Like, a couple $1 million in profit. Oh, that's nothing to me. I can now create a new business, manufacture small dog leashes, and now prioritize my product, and then undercut that company that was using Amazon as a platform. But now Amazon is the platform, is the manufacturer, is the business, right?
It's like it really is Amazon finding out what people want and saying like, come to my house and sell your cookies. I'm going to go start making your cookies. I'm going to go start selling your cookies at a cheaper price while you're in my house.
Yeah.
All right, now I'm going to kick you out of my house and just keep making your cookies.
Yeah.
And that's what Amazon does.
And that's that's supply and demand, right? Like, now you have what was originally a unique product being sold at a price regardless of the percentage markup. And then now you have Amazon coming in and being like, we can take a smaller margin because we're Amazon. We don't need the margin anyway. All we're doing is we're essentially just creating this product for cheaper. Now you as a consumer in this free market capitalistic situation is now presented two products and one is cheaper.
Yeah.
We are now in a situation where if we are to follow basic logic, we are now going to consume the cheaper product, right?
Yeah.
Especially if we don't have the money to just shell out for the other product just for the sake of it. If you're getting a similar, if not identical product, like why wouldn't you get the cheaper one? That is just literally, that's just logic. And this topic permeates beyond Amazon, beyond tiny dog leashes, like organic fruits versus non-organic fruits, like GMO product, like all that kind of stuff, things that are sold cheaper because they have certain growth hormones in them or XYZ, blah, 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 blah. They are grown for like less long because
making my pesticides cheaper and being able to grow my plants faster and, paying my workers less to pick my plants. All of these things contribute to a company's ability to be able to undercut a bottom line.
Absolutely. And then bringing this back to billionaires, right? And kind of going, maybe taking a step away from the system itself, but I think we have to understand that the system is built to benefit those that take advantage of it, right? And I guess every system can be, used and abused, and those who are going to capitalize on it, no pun intended, the most are the ones that, usually get ahead and get further ahead. But I think given everything that we've explained is that there are so many things built into the system that we currently have that not only incentivize individualistic behavior, but it also, I guess it punishes people that either that is not within their moral compass. And then it also removes, as you were saying, like the immoral billionaire it removes the reason and the incentive to do moral actions. And I think that's the biggest one, amongst other damages that billionaires have, like in the zero-sum capital gain, like economy that you were explaining, right? Where, if all the money's being siphoned from the rich, then the middle class drains until we're all poor, and then all the rich people, right? But the other thing is that now there is within capitalism, there is no moral compass that guides you to caring about anyone other than yourself. And as a billionaire, if you're like, I need to increase my revenue profit sharing, I need to, make more dividends and all these kind of things. And I apologize if these are terms that people aren't familiar with, right? And I apologize.
If at the end of the day, you are a company owner who's thinking about his company, typically you'll be thinking about your stockholders and your profitability.
You're thinking about ways to make more money, right? And even if you already have an exuberant amount of money, in a
You want
capitalistic
more.
society, it only incentivizes you to do the things that will require you to get more.
Yeah,
There
there is
is,
no end game. You don't hit 1 billion and go, oh, great, 1 billion. Then it's like, all
I
right,
won at capitalism. Like,
what about 2 billion, Jeff?
yeah. Bring out the guillotine. but really, right? Like, that is the issue.
Yeah.
That is the issue with capitalism. Like, yes, within a concept, it makes sense, right? Within our vacuum example of apples, it makes sense. But when
Yeah.
applied to 330 plus million people in the United States, the top 1% having, I don't know what percentage of the wealth in America, like, at some point, right? Like, it's just too much.
And I think there's one really big thing that capitalism in practice versus in theory doesn't take into consideration, is that when you're looking at that vacuum and you're talking about apple prices and you're trying to teach capitalism, you're probably going to use some natural factor to decide whether one apple price is more or less and whether one company survives. And I remember in school, capitalism was just this survival of the fittest. Did your company survive? No, too bad. It was natural. Sorry. And I sometimes when we've talked about it in the last hour, that's kind of how we've talked about it, especially when we use terms like free market. And I think it's important to remember that capitalism is all about the free market. But then when you take that example of Amazon undercutting their competitors on purpose, I don't know if I can consider that free market. Like, it's free to do whatever you want, but I feel like when they said free market, they didn't mean freedom. They meant natural. They meant, like, how are things going to play out, as opposed to what are you going to do to force it one way or the other.
Yeah.
Because there really is no freedom for anybody involved when Jeff goes, I'm going to undercut my competition and become the only possible supplier. There's zero freedom there. You can say that's a free market. He had the option to do that, but that's like tolerance of intolerance right there.
Yeah. And I guess my point didn't come across, or I didn't say it, but, like, I guess my biggest point, and the one that I've come down to that, like, really has shown me the light for me personally, is that, yes, we call America's system capitalism, but based on the definition of capitalism versus the way it is enacted in the United States, it is not the same concept.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are so many things in play that remove it from being free market capitalism and, like, actually putting it into this, like, system that we function in.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things at play, like you were saying, just like government regulations, tax breaks for companies with X amount of, like, billions of dollars, right? Their ability to use financial literacy and to then turn it into profit and more, dividends, and for them, like, more money at the end of the day, just, like, all those things combined, it just removes the free market concept completely.
Okay. I just did a quick search because I this entire hour and like, now that you've said I like capitalism as a definition, but how we're applying it is not necessarily correct. We didn't talk about this at all while we were, like, researching this, and I don't think we've said the term, but it's late stage capitalism.
Yes, that's exactly
what it is. And I just did a quick look for a definition. So late capitalism, or late stage capitalism, is a term first used in print by German economist Werner Sombart around the turn of the 20th century. The term has been used in the US and Canada to refer to perceived absurdities, contradictions, crises, injustices, and inequalities created by modern business development. It's capitalism in a theory, but then taken to the worst possible extreme that we could have applied it to. And that's where the issue is. Late stage capitalism. When you define capitalism, like, when I look at that definition, like, that's not bad. And when I look at it as in terms of, like, survival of the fittest, it makes sense why. And I have that idea too. I look at, like, let's say Simi Valley, for example. I look not the people, but the businesses. I look at places that close down or small businesses that survive. And I've kind of been on this for a while, but I'm like, this is like across the board for me in terms of how many resources do we have in the economy and how much is being used.
Yeah.
I will bring it down to the smallest level. I think if you as a business cannot afford to pay your employees a living wage, then you are in a market where there are too many resources being consumed. If you can't sell enough to make enough to pay enough, there's no space in the economy for you. Survival of the fittest is going to take place. And at that point, I'm like, hey, man, too bad. I don't think anybody should be fighting for one or the other. No one should be like, I've got to make my sandwich shop survive, so I'm going to sell 50 cents off for a week to try and like bring people here for a bit. That's not what it should be. But I think, we're at this point where we've got so many coffee shops. We've got so many sandwich shops. We've got so many ice cream parlors. We've got a Walmart in every corner. Capitalism and our country like can't hold all these big businesses and all these small businesses. There's just not enough space. And that's what late stage capitalism is.
Yeah.
The market share is just consumed by all these people.
It's saturated with an abundance of things.
Yeah.
And it's, man.
Are we wrapping up? I've got one concept to talk about. I don't have to.
No. Okay, so we just hit that hour. I'm okay with going a little bit further than this. I'm just letting you know that we hit about an hour just now. But I still have my question that I want to ask you. And I don't know if this is gonna bridge to like a part 2, but because it might, but I don't know. But go ahead, say your thing.
Okay, so my thing real quick. My dad sat me down, MSNBC, showed me a quick little interview with somebody the other day. And I just want to run over what the guy said because it talks about like oversaturation of the market and there's just too many people with too much. Mm-hmm. Within the stock market, there's a couple players in the game that are huge, especially throughout this pandemic. There are a couple stocks that have like grown 50 to 100% in just the last 6 months. And then there's a bunch of stocks that have stayed just doing this, or just doing this, just doing a little bit of this, but no one's done this.
Yeah.
So he took 2 graphs, and I think it was either the NASDAQ or the S&P, but it was a stock fund. It was like a mutual fund of stocks, mm-hmm. and then this much smaller portfolio, which was the top 10% of these stocks. These like set of stocks had X% return. They did grow because our economy in that time has grown. But then he looked and he's like, all right, of that growth, most of it was actually these 10 stocks. So let's say there's 100 stocks in the fund. Mm-hmm. NASDAQ is 100 stocks. Duh. Mm-hmm.
S&P 500 is 500.
S&P 500. We're learning. So let's say these 10 stocks out of the 100, that's all the people are buying. So you're looking at this 100 stock fund going, all these businesses are healthy. It's actually only these 10. Yeah. And that's what's happening in the investing world, as well as the like corner store level. We don't have any room for businesses to like start, like actual places. But then within the actual economy, within our market share, within what we're investing in, we're putting so much money as investors into that still the top 10%. And we're still investing in these companies. We don't give any of these smaller, $10, $20, $30, $40, $50 stocks. We don't really give them that much money.
Yeah.
We're out here buying $200, $300, $400, $1,000, $2,000 stocks. And that's, again, more late stage capitalism.
We love to see it.
Too many resources, too few people. Everybody else logically has to starve.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it's
the only way. It's like the late stage capitalism is like the natural trend of capitalism if you're not like putting the moral background into
mm-hmm.
it.
Okay. And with that, you know what? I think we can use my question and then turn it a little bit and save it for another episode.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'll mention it to you after we stop recording.
Okay.
But
okay.
I think this can be another episode, and I think I think I know how we're going to integrate it. I think we can make it pretty
So,
interesting.
all these
I think you're gonna like
all
it. I
these
think you're gonna like
listeners are
it.
going to be so excited.
I think you're listening, and it's not gonna be the next episode because I mean, FYI, we're gonna film the next episode in like 10
2
minutes
minutes.
after we pause this, like after we stop this. But we're already hitting that hour. Indy and I agreed that we try to hit anywhere from 45 to an hour, and not try to go too far beyond that. I think we're about at an hour and 5 right now. But I don't know if there's any concluding statement. I think you kind of felt it ramp up. It like built up with like the facts of financial literacy and then snowballed its way all the way straight through the middle of capitalism and billionaires and all that kind of good stuff. If you have any thoughts on capitalism or anything like that that you'd like to share with Indy or I believe our socials should be linked in the description box. I'll go ahead and I'm saying like I'm not the one who's going to put them in there, but
you're going to put them in.
I'm going to put them in there. If you want to have a discussion or, you know, even in the comments of the YouTube video, that would be cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's all we have for right now. And with
I do have a really wonderful, just wrapping up.
Yes. Would you like to close it with a quote?
Yes. It's not a quote, but I do want to sum up everything that we've learned today.
Yes.
Right. So we started out, I gave you guys a brief overview of financial literacy. Mm-hmm. I really wanted you guys to know within our economy how you guys can have the most possible success. It's a risky economy. It's a tough economy. I don't agree with the system that we're living in whatsoever, but unfortunately, these are the rules of the game that we are currently playing. So I wanted to lay out, you know, as much information for you guys to get as possible. That's all that first half. And then we really just ranted about capitalism for a bit. And, you know, I think it's really important to understand at the end of all of this, I had a quote, not a quote, my own quote. That's it. In our current system, shouldn't be this way, but in our current system, financial literacy and the ability to save are privileges. Not to say that it can't be done if you're poor, but because of the way that we have made them in our system, we've probably made it so that you cannot be saving and you cannot be financially literate from poverty. And that's a really big issue within our system. So I guess like your takeaway is here's the rules, but I really want you listeners to go out and like actively try to change things because this is not a sustainable form of economy. Even though I've given you rules, everyone can't follow these rules. Not everyone is going to be successful in this system based on what we've told you today.
Yeah, and just to go off of that, and I want to reiterate it again, you know, your means and where you are right now or where you've come from will not dictate what you can understand, you know, what you do become literate within the financial world, what you're able to do. But like any other privilege, it takes more work. Like, and that I know people and, you know, that have done that, you know. So it's not to say that you cannot do it, but we're saying that with the system that we have, it's harder for you. And your own knowledge is, I mean, knowledge is always power, but specifically when it comes to finances and understanding your finances and understanding how the things you do play into the system and how the system affects the things you do, that only empowers you to do better for yourself, right? And we were talking about how the system benefits you for prioritizing yourself. And I think that, you know, unless Jeff Bezos is listening to this, I think we're all in the position where we need to empower ourselves more to combat the issues and the unwritten rules of the game at hand.
Yes.
Because that's the only way that people like Indy or myself or anyone that could be listening to this will, you know, be able to rise above the situation that we're currently in whatever way possible. And that's kind of what we want to draw attention to today. And that's kind of, I hope that's what we did. And as well as give you, I think so.
I feel good at the end of it.
Yeah. I feel relieved. I don't know, in some way, shape or form, maybe because it's over. All right.
You're like,
I know, right? I'm like, oh no. All right. So with that, we will bid thee adieu until episode 3. Thank you for watching the Sadboy Sessions. Take care, everybody. Namaste.